encouragement, and hope to help your life rebound through faith in Jesus Christ. Thank you for joining me as we continue to look at the book of Acts, and we're in Acts chapter 1, and I'm going to read today verses 9 through to 11, which are as follows. After Jesus said this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. They were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly two men dressed in white stood beside them. Men of Galilee, they said, why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you've seen him go into heaven. Well, Cousin Angus was relating recently a story about what happens at night in his home. He says before his wife gets ready for bed, that she puts cold cream on her face like she's icing a cake, and then she puts her hair in curlers, and then she covers it all with a net, and then she looks at Angus and she says, "Kiss me goodnight." To which Angus responds by putting up his hands and saying, "Take me to your leader." Well, you know, sometimes we don't always see things so clearly. Sometimes things change around us. And as we see this relationship changing between Jesus and the disciples, where he ascends up into the heaven, we're told that they were looking intently up into the sky as he was going. And if I'm one of the disciples, I'm asking myself, what does that looking intently mean to me? Well, I wonder if, as I'm looking up, watching Jesus ascend into the heavens, if I'm not wondering if he won't turn around and come back. And maybe that's part of the longing of my heart too, is to see him come back, because we know things are going to be different after this. Maybe they're just lost in the miracle of the ascension. That's not every day you get to see a person take flight without wings and ascend into the heavens. So maybe if I'm one of the disciples, I'm just lost in the miracle. Maybe I'm reflecting on the past with Jesus and the present without him. And that would certainly give me pause. Maybe if I'm one of the disciples, I'm grieving the loss because there is a change of relationship that now happens when Jesus is hidden from our eyes, no longer visibly present, but by the same token, still present with power in our lives. So there is a change of relationship, as we noticed the last time. And so maybe if I'm one of the disciples, I'm just immobilized by the immensity of the task that has been being handed to me by Jesus to be his witness in Judea, Jerusalem, Samaria, and the uttermost ends of the earth. And I don't know about you, but when I get overwhelmed by the immensity of a task in front of me, it gets very difficult sometimes to even just take the first step. And I wonder, maybe that's what's going on with the disciples. And of course, Jesus' instruction to them is, wait for the gift my Father promised. So maybe they're just waiting. Maybe they figure they're supposed to stand there in that moment on that ground and wait for whatever it is that's coming. But whatever's happening, their moment of standing there looking intently into the heavens is interrupted by a couple of people who show up instantly, and we recognize pretty easily that they're angels who show up. And how do we know that? Well, their wardrobe gives it away for one. They're dressed in white. Their sudden appearance also gives it away. They came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden they're there in the middle of the conversation. And thirdly, they come with a message of authority for the disciples that has some impact on what they're to do next. And so the angels come with a message, and the message is, men of Galilee, why do you stand here looking up into the sky? This same Jesus who was taken from you into heaven will come back the same way you've seen him go into heaven. And I don't know that this was the tone, but I kind of wonder if the angels aren't kind of saying, yoo-hoo, anybody home? Haven't you got someplace to go, something to do? And of course, then there is this awakening with them, and that the time of looking intently is over, and it's time to get going and get on with what's happening. And so I think sometimes the tendency for us is to get so enamored with a miracle that we see that we lose sight of the doorway for proclamation that is always a part of a miracle. It's my belief that a miracle never happens except as an opportunity for the gospel to be proclaimed. And as you look through the scriptures, I think you'll see that that's true. Wherever there's a miracle, there's opportunity for the gospel to be proclaimed. And so we sometimes get so enamored with the moment that we lose sight. Even something as simple as worship. We can love worship and long to spend more and more time in worship, but it sometimes comes at the expense of the witness that is called for from us. And so the angels come with this message, which is basically go and wait. You've got someplace to go do it. But the hard part is it's the waiting. So let's just unpack that a little bit. So when they're invited to go, I think going is about getting into position for obedience. It's about getting into position for action. In the years that I used to play baseball, we used to get taught all the time when you're on the field playing in defensive positions, there was always a ready position. You were always on the balls of your feet, on your toes, especially in the infield, glove on the ground because it's easier to come up on a ball than go down. But there was a way to be positioned, to be ready for action, to be ready to respond. And so I think the invitation to go, and for them it's go back to Jerusalem, is an invitation to be prepared for responsiveness. And then the waiting, that's the hard part. It's the hardest part of any ministry. It's the hardest part of any life when you're dealing with the unknown. You don't know what you're supposed to be doing, and you're awaiting the instructions. And that's what's happening in these verses. It's not seizing control for ourselves and beginning to do the things that we have control over, that we can handle with our own gifts, with our own strength, with our own abilities. It's not about handling things with our own logic. It's about being attentive in the waiting to what it is that God's inviting us to do and being prepared for the power and the authority that He will give us to do it. It's about being available to serve. It's waiting and praying, and that's certainly what happens with the disciples. They are to wait, and as they do, the best posture for that is praying, and that's what they do until the power and the authority came. The promise of Acts 1 fulfilled in Acts 2. And yet I also think in Acts chapter 1, we see a premature acting, because what we see is as they go back and as they're gathering together and they're praying together, they decide that they need to elect a new member to replace Judas. And I think that's premature. I don't think that was God's intention. To be honest, I think the 12 were chosen by Jesus, and so would the 13th. And the 13th would be Saul, who would become Paul the Apostle. That's a story for another day. But the matter here is that the promise would be fulfilled in Acts chapter 2. There's a reminder here, I think, that I can do a lot of things in my own strength and ability, but the best thing for me to do is to do them in the power and the authority of Jesus Christ, following His will, His leading and guiding in my life. And to that end, I'd rather serve in the authority and power of Jesus, where God gets all the glory, because it usually happens through the weakness of my life rather than the strength of my life, and where he can become visible through my weakness. And so as I think about this passage, I have, again, a very simple prayer. It's, Lord, let your presence be manifest in your working in me. And I pray that for you today as well.